This is sweetgrass. It doesn't always light all at once, it just lights in little bits, but it's really important because it doesn't take a lot of sweetgrass to really purify an area. I also have firestone in my hand. It is charged with positive light energy. I also have a shadow stone. So, now that I am in the process of getting a moth on my body, I think it's time that I talk about Ancestor Moth. So the significance of the moth pops up in a number of different cultures. While I do not have the authority to speak on those cultures, I can speak to what the moth represents and why it's an important symbol and functionary in the multiverse. Specifically in the material universe is what we're talking about. So, the moth, it is often said in some cultures that the moth comes to us, flutters around us, and lets its presence be felt when a friend or an ancestor is kind of coming back to visit us who has deceased, whether they just died or died a long time ago. Ancestors come as moths, and they come to visit us. There's a couple things tying into what makes this more prevalent in multiple cultures than on other things, other stories. The moth, the butterfly, and other insects that are not very detrimental to us and tend to flutter around and perhaps even migrate. There's not much to their soul. They're not a very advanced soul. But at the same time, they're not a lower soul. They're not a negative soul. So the dead will often kind of, you could say, take over a moth or a butterfly for a little bit. They don't take it over permanently, and they never cause the moth or the butterfly to be harmed or harm itself. But they take them over to kind of say goodbye. Usually it's goodbye. Sometimes it's hello, but usually it's goodbye. So the moth or the butterfly, in this case the moth, is taken over, kind of ridden in a way by the spirit of the deceased. And they might flutter around or land on you as a way to say goodbye. They might not have the strength, or they might not have the energy or the power to say it in a verbal way that we could perceive it. But it's very easy to take over a moth. It's very easy to just ride it for a little while and visit a human and then go back out. When we die, the orb that we become, the little tiny orb, it doesn't really weigh anything. And when you're that orb, it doesn't feel like you're small. The orb is kind of a gateway, a keyhole into this dimension from the soul, kind of beyond this dimension. It's kind of a keyhole and a vehicle at the same time. These little tiny orbs you might have heard of or seen, they're not always that, but a lot of the time they are that, if it's very specific circumstances. But the way that these orbs that we peek through and are when we're dying, or when we have died, when we have left our body, they move a lot like moths through the air, and they kind of flutter, very light, kind of born and riding cosmic winds and cosmic forces, but taking advantage of a little peace that naturally surrounds a person who has just died. Even if they died in a number of different ways, there's this natural peace that the body goes through, maybe a bewilderment, but also a peace. And there's this window where nothing's going to really attack you or get you, but you're fluttering around, very much like a moth. And just like the moth, these little orbs often seek the light, but it's a light beyond this realm. It's a light that's not a physical light. It's a light that they can see because they're in between dimensions in a way, peeking through and riding these keyholes that are these orbs. And they can see the light beyond, and they go towards that light. The moths are a material echo of this in our realm, in our material universe. And they have special significance because of this. Moths also, during meditation, deep in meditation, or perhaps when you're just starting sometimes, or when you're looking at your third eye, very intensely, you might see the outline of kind of a moth. If you're gazing up into your third eye, you might see the outline of a moth-like shape. It might have eyes on the wings, something like that. Very feminine eyes are often a sign of Devi, or the goddess, kind of gazing in. She can guide with her gaze, but kind of gazing in, gazing upon us, looking upon us. But the moth, our nerves and the veins in our body, when they are ridden by a certain energy, or when we direct our energy, when they manifest energetically, the veins and the nervous system kind of combines with that energy to form this moth-like shape in meditation, or even in times when you're gazing intensely into your third eye. But the moth might be emblazoned in your vision, just kind of like a dim light. Not very, sometimes it can be very intense, but usually it's just a dim light where you're seeing this moth. And that is another way that we see it as a function, interdimensional functionary. And we might call it Ancestor Moth because we're respecting the moth's role, the moth's purpose, the moth's symbolism, but also because our ancestors, or the deceased, ride them. And it's just a part of the way energy leaves this realm. It's a beautiful combination in a single insect, the moth. Moth more so than butterfly, but butterfly has so you can see a butterfly wings as well. These are very light interdimensional beings. They're not interdimensional, but interdimensional symbols that they energetically are beings in other realms and in between. Here, the material manifestation is a moth, but there are many beings that serve a very similar function and have the same function as the symbol does, that kind of float between realms and help here and there. They're very light. All of what we are, so much of what we are, everything that activates us is just so small, just like a moth, and very light, very fluttery. And for us to be here in this realm, it requires remarkable trust from the universe, from the goddess, from all that allows us to be here. It requires a tremendous amount of trust, but we're very, very light. It could stop us from entering this realm, from incarnating. There's many things that could stop us because we're so small and we're so fragile, like a moth. But because of that lightness, we can come into this realm, and we're allowed to come into this realm through various incarnations. So when you see a moth, think ancestor. You see a moth, think in between dimensions. When you see a moth, think soul. And that is the value of Ancestor Moth. Thank you very much.